Okay, what I need a volunteer. Some brave person to come up and help me with an object lesson. Usually somebody gets dobbed in by the person next to them. No? Okay, come on up. I wish I had a prize, but I don't. You can take anything we use, I guess. And if you come around to that side, what's your name?
Isabel.
Isabel, okay. Good to meet you. I'm Tom. What we're going to do is I got some objects, and we're going to squeeze these objects and see what comes out of them, okay? So the first object, what do you think is going to come out? Okay, let's see. Just, in the bucket. Nice so that people can see what's coming out. Yeah, there you go. Okay. We'll save a little for tonight. That's good. I bought these at Dollar Tree in the States, and it's expensive, right? $1. So toothpaste came out of the tube. What do you think is going to come out of here? Okay. Yep. Okay. Whoops. It's kind of a dangerous object lesson. Okay. So it looks like tomato came out of the tomato, right, when we squeezed it? Okay, you can drop it in there. Anybody wants lunch afterwards, come up and help yourself. And this is kind of the dangerous one, actually. What do we think is going to come out of here? And I'm going to just slightly, okay, because it goes everywhere if we're not careful. Okay, what do you think is coming out? Okay, so we squeeze the egg and egg comes out. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much, Emily. Thank you. Oh, I should, yeah. There you go. We'll give it a towel instead. That's a much better idea. Give her a hand. Thank you. Jesus at one time told 3 stories to make the same point, to get the principle across so that when he finally got to the punchline of the 3rd story, they couldn't argue with him. And so what we're doing is we're setting the principle here. The principle is when you squeeze something, what is inside of it is what's going to come out, right? Okay, so that's a principle we're going to look at today. Whenever you squeeze something, whatever is inside of it is going to come out. So today we're going to look again at the book of Daniel, and we're going to see this principle on display. When we get squeezed, and I'm talking figuratively, not literally, when we get squeezed, whatever is inside of us is going to come out. Whether it's temptation, or some kind of pressure, or some kind of problem, persecution, whatever squeezes us is going to show us what's inside of us. So if you have your Bible, open up to Daniel chapter 6. It's where we're going to spend our time today for the most part. And as we look at this chapter, look at this story, I want us to observe 3 aspects of the story. The first part is I want us to observe people outside of God's knowledge, the knowledge of God and the plans that they are making. I want us to observe how God's servant responds to that. And then third, I want us to observe the rule of God in this situation. So people operating outside the knowledge of God and the plans that they make, the response of God's servant to that, and then the rule of God. So we'll pick up the story in verse 1 of Daniel 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to whom to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give an account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they couldn't find a ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Now, here we see people operating outside the knowledge of God. These are natural people. These are unregenerate people. For whatever reason, they don't like Daniel and they don't want to see him succeed. They don't want this promotion to go through. It may be that they don't like Daniel personally, something about him they don't like. It may be that they don't like Jewish people, so this is anti-Semitism. We see a bit of that in the book of Daniel and in this time period. It may just be demonically inspired, so it's Satan having a go at God and God's people. Or it may simply be an example of somebody is getting something that I'm not getting, I want what they're getting, and I want it for myself. I don't want them to get it. And Daniel is getting squeezed in this situation. Public servants in the ancient Near East often lived on this knife's edge. This atmosphere of jealousy, suspicion, ambition was kind of the rule of the day. Maybe it's not that different than today. Backstabbing was standard operating procedure, and depending on which king was in power, that king might be very open to listening to allegations against you. And he might regularly reshuffle his team, and you might get shuffled out of the team. And if you did, that could have some serious consequences for you. Consequences in terms of your prestige, your power, your finances. It could even mean your life in some cases. Came across an ancient poem. They've titled in today the poem of the righteous sufferer. And the speaker in the poem is this public servant who has fallen out of favor. And he laments how badly things have gone against him. 7 members of the court have worked actively against him. One of the 7 says, "I'm going to make him take his own life." A second boasts that he was the one who got him fired. A third man anticipates taking his place. A fourth wants to take his house. And then a 5th, 6th, and 7th are doing all that they can to influence the thinking of the people around him against him. The writer describes these backstabbers as being as merciless as fiends. He says they're like demons. They're slandering him, they're lying about him, and his life is being destroyed. Now, it appears that Daniel's workplace is very much like this situation that gets described in this ancient document. The text says in verse 4, "The high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they couldn't find any ground for complaint or fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him." So was he being dishonest or negligent? Was he being dishonest? Was he just incompetent? They couldn't find anything. It says that 3 times. He uses the verb to find. They weren't able to find anything. They checked his bank accounts. They went through his computer. They sifted through his rubbish. And this guy was squeaky clean. Nothing wrong. So they had to go to plan B. In verse 5, it says, we shall not find any ground or complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in the connection with the law of his God. So the only way we're going to trip this guy up is he's a bit of a religious fanatic. Maybe we can use that against him. And so off they go to King Darius. Verse 6, "Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, 'O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the counselors, the governors are agreed that the king shall establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. 3 times in this story, verses 5, 12, 16, it says they came as a group. One translation puts this, they came thronging together. It's probably a really good translation. Thronging, so there's this mob that comes before the king. There's an interesting parallel in Psalm 2. Psalm 2 is the only other place where this particular word gets used. I want to read a few verses from Psalm 2. Begins verse 1, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? That's the word to throng or to plot, to come together. Why do the nations rage, the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. The thought is very similar to the book of Daniel. You get people who are outside of the knowledge of God coming together, making some plan to attack or oppose God and God's people. Now, we'll come back to Psalm 2 a little bit later in the message. Daniel's colleagues in Daniel 6 get Darius to sign this decree. No one can make any petition to any god or to any human being except to King Darius for 30 days, and if they do, then it's over the fence into the lion's cage at the zoo. Daniel finds himself being squeezed by these people who don't have a knowledge of God. They've considered all the angles. They've made their plans. This is what we're going to do, and nothing can stop us. From time to time, we find ourselves in situations where we're getting squeezed as Christians. Surprised a little bit at what a common theme this actually is in the New Testament. It's probably not one that we preach on a whole lot. But I think of books like Ephesians, Hebrews, 1 Peter. In each of these books, we see Christians who are being squeezed. So in the book of Hebrews and much of 1 Peter, the Christians are being squeezed by people, human beings. In Ephesians 6 and in 1 Peter 5, we see that it's actually Satan and his groupies who are squeezing and having a go at God's people. And the New Testament seems to be saying this is normal. When we get out of step with the world, we should expect some sort of a pushback, some sort of a reaction. Peter says in 1 Peter 4:12, dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you. In other words, Peter's saying suffering is normal. Opposition is normal. Don't think that it's strange. It's going to happen when you get out of step with the world. For example, you come to faith in Jesus Christ. Everything's going to be great now, isn't it? Everybody's going to be happy with that decision, aren't they? We had a couple students that found that wasn't the case when we were at the college in Australia. One couple came to Christ, came to faith, and then they ended up at college, and the husband's family reacted very badly to that and gave them all kinds of trouble. We had a guy come to Australia from another country. He had originally been in another religion and had converted to Christianity, and his friends beat him physically when he did. You might make the decision not to work on Sunday or to keep your kids out of sports on Sunday. And I'm not saying that's something you have to do, but you might make that decision because you think it's very important for us as a family to be together with our church family on Sunday morning. And that could have some negative impact upon your career. It could have some negative impact on your child's ability to advance in that particular sport because of that decision. Your doctor may recommend an abortion based on some test result that has come in. And if you don't, you're going to be criticized for it. The medical community will criticize you for that. Your friends and family may criticize you for that. And so from time to time, as we live our lives and we try to live out our convictions, we find ourselves being squeezed. And just like those items that we squeezed earlier, whatever is in us when we get squeezed is what's going to come out of us. And so the important question is, what's in us? What's in us? What came out of Daniel when he got squeezed? Back in Daniel 6, verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God as he had done previously. What happened when Daniel got squeezed? What came out of Daniel? Faith. Faith. This guy never skips a beat. Now, when you study stories, there are different kinds of characters. Daniel's kind of a boring character, actually. He's what they call a flat character. A flat character is one that is very predictable and standard, and they don't have a lot of complications. So Daniel's a flat character because he always does the right thing. You're never in doubt about what Daniel's going to do. He does what's expected. He just kept doing the same things after the edict was signed that he had done before. He wasn't going to let the people around him set the agenda for how he lived. Who he was and what he did before was who he was and what he did after. Now, did Daniel have to pray 3 times a day? Is there anything in the law that says a person has to pray 3 times a day? No. Is his regular practice, so he just kept doing it. One thing that's interesting about his prayer life is that he opened his windows and prayed toward Jerusalem. Why would he do that? Was that required by the law? That wasn't required by the law either. So why is he praying toward Jerusalem at this time? Well, the answer may be found in Daniel chapter 9. I think it probably is. In Daniel 9, it says that this is set at the same time as the story in Daniel 6. It's during the first year of the reign of Darius. And Daniel says in chapter 9 that he's reading the prophet Jeremiah. And so Jeremiah has predicted that Israel is going into exile for 70 years. Daniel was in the first group of exiles who came to Babylon and probably came as a teenager. It was probably 67 years earlier. 67 years earlier, Daniel's reading 70 years, and he's saying, okay, how should I respond based upon what God has said in his word? And this is what Daniel chapter 9, verse 3 says. Then I turned my face to the Lord God, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. And then pretty much the rest of chapter 9 is Daniel's prayer, confessing his sins, the sins of the people, and asking God to be gracious to them as a nation and to bring them back to the land of Judah and to the city of Jerusalem. Now, this is exactly how a godly person at that time should have responded. If you want to take a look at 1 Kings chapter 8, I'm going to read a few verses from there. 1 Kings 8, Solomon has just finished building the temple, and it's a prayer of dedication. And this is what he prays toward the end of his prayer. 1 Kings 8, beginning in verse 46. If they sin against you, so if Israel sins against God, for there is no one who does not sin, and you are angry with them and give them to an enemy, so that they are carried away captive to the land of the enemy, far off or near, yet if they turn in their heart in the land to which they've been carried captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captors, saying, we have sinned and have acted perversely and wickedly, If they repent with all their mind and with all their heart in the land of their enemies who carried them captive, and pray to you toward their land which you gave to their fathers, the city that you have chosen, and the house that I have built for your name, then hear in heaven your dwelling place their prayer and their plea, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you, and all their transgressions that they have committed against you, and grant them compassion in the sight of those who carried them captive, so that they may have compassion on them. You see that? This is evidently a very key time for God's people to be praying. And so Daniel continued to pray as he had always prayed, to pray toward Jerusalem, to pray for Jerusalem, that God would grant them favor in the eyes of the people of Babylon, and that they'd be able to go back home to their homeland. Now, when you and I get squeezed, what comes out of us? What comes out of you? What came out of Daniel was faith. What came out of Daniel was integrity. When you get questioned about your faith, what comes out? When ethical issues arise at work or in business, what comes out? When your convictions are starting to impact your income statement, what comes out? Is someone else going to set your agenda for you, or are you going to set your own agenda and follow God's agenda? Essentially, there are only two responses we can have. We can either respond by faith or we can respond by unbelief. Faith says, I have chosen to honor God with my life, and by His grace, I will continue to honor God come what may. Unbelief, on the other hand, backs off of convictions out of fear of what could happen. Daniel doesn't back off of his convictions here. He just continues to do what he's always done. Remember at the beginning that I said I wanted us to observe three things. So I wanted us to observe people operating outside the knowledge of God and the plans they make, how God's servant responds, and then the third thing, it's really the most important thing in the story. It's ultimately God rules. God rules. And God is kind of a hidden character in this story. We don't have any thunderbolts from heaven and no lightning claps, no dreams, no visions. God doesn't speak to anyone. He doesn't manifest himself in any form. And you kind of get the impression that God isn't in this story, but he's actually the most important character in this story. What happened when Daniel got squeezed and faith oozed out is that God was able to demonstrate that he rules. This is really the main point of this story. When Daniel got squeezed and faith oozed out, God got the opportunity to demonstrate that he rules. King Darius actually highlights this point, the point of the story, in verse 16, back in Daniel chapter 6. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king signed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. We'll skip to verse 19. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. And as he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no wrong." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up from the den, and no kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Amazing story. Last time I preached this, it was kind of funny. Somebody had their phone on, and there was this high-pitched, squeaky little voice that says, "I am here. I am here." And it's very appropriate, actually, that the reminder that God's saying, "I am here." Now, it wasn't really the voice of God, that the sound wasn't what I was expecting. But it was quite interesting that timing was right then. We might consider what would have happened if Daniel hadn't chosen to alter his pattern of prayer. I mean, this would have been really easy to do. After all, it was only for 30 days. And 30 days, you just, stop what you're doing and then pick up again. It's no big deal. A person doesn't have to pray at the same time every day. A person doesn't have to pray with his windows open facing Jerusalem. You don't even have to close your eyes when you pray. Doesn't Paul say, pray without ceasing? It's kind of hard to pray with your eyes closed on your knees 24/7. Hard to live your life that way. And Daniel might have easily rationalized this. I can't get caught praying. After all, my people need me in this position. God strategically put me in this position. God needs me in this position. So God will understand if I do something different. But if Daniel had done that, he would have taken away an excellent opportunity for God to do something truly astounding. And one of the big messages of Daniel chapters 1-6 is that even during the dark period of the Babylonian captivity, God was still in charge and still able to protect and to prosper his people. Now, I said we'd come back to Psalm 2, and I want to do that now. So people outside the knowledge of God are opposing God and the rule of his king, his Messiah. How does God respond to that? Verse 4, Psalm 2, verse 4. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury. In all of these oppressive situations that we find ourselves in, the truth is that God is still on the throne. God rules. That's what the sovereignty of God means. It means that God rules unhindered. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't answer to anybody, and nobody can stop him. That's the sovereignty of God. We come under pressure. God never comes under pressure. We get squeezed. God never feels squeezed. And God is able to deliver us in any and every situation that we may find ourselves in. Now, it may look different in different situations. But when we get squeezed and faith is what oozes out, we give God the opportunity to demonstrate to the world that he rules. We give him the chance to do something truly astounding that will catch the eyes of the people around us. Now, the storyline of Daniel in the lion's den actually has some very strong parallels to the story of Jesus Christ. The early church actually noted some of these. Jesus was the ultimate righteous man, persecuted by people outside of God. The Jewish leaders were opposing Jesus out of jealousy, and they went to the Gentile ruler, to Pilate, after finding no flaws, after finding nothing that they could really accuse him of. They brought him to Pilate. Pilate found no flaws, but in the end, they were able to convince Pilate to condemn Jesus. Jesus was placed in this pit. A stone was rolled over the pit. It was sealed with an official seal, and a short time later, there was an amazing deliverance as Jesus rose from the dead. That's the gospel story. God is able to deliver us when we stand on our convictions. And when we get squeezed, and faith is what oozes out of our lives, we give God the opportunity to demonstrate that He rules. And God loves to demonstrate that He rules. The challenge for us today as we read this story, I believe, is to be people of conviction, to be people who walk by faith, who entrust ourselves to God, and then just see what He does. And may He help us to do that as we go out and live our lives this week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this story. Thank you for your word. It does speak to where we are, to where we live. Life is often hard for us. We have seasons when life is very hard for us. But Father, make us people of conviction. Make us people of faith. People who don't trust in ourselves, but who are willing to trust in you when things get difficult, when things don't make sense. And would you use us to show the world, to show the people around us that you are real and that you rule, that Jesus is real, and that He has the power to change our lives. Father, I don't know what each individual is going through here today, but I know that some will be struggling, some will be under tremendous times of persecution. Others will be suffering from tremendous times of temptation. Others will be experiencing various other trials. But Father, I pray that what is in them would be faith, and that would ooze out, come what may, would ooze out, and that you would demonstrate your power and your rule in their lives. Father, give us your grace to respond in very positive and faithful ways. We pray in Jesus' name.